Hello everyone. Should premarital genetic testing be avoided due to risks of genetic discrimination and stigmatization? I'm Olaite from Nigeria, and I will be on the affirmative team with my partner Ozioma Stella Maris from Nigeria. So first off, what is premarital genetic testing? Premarital genetic testing involves the screening of individuals before marriage to detect career status or genetic conditions such as sickle cell anemia and thalassemia. Now, globally, it has been discovered that approximately 300,000 to 400,000 infants are born annually with sickle cell disease, and nearly 75% occurs in the sub-Saharan Africa. So, yes, the burden is real. However, the ethical question before us is not whether prevention matters. So, why prevention is important, implementation of this screening method must also be evaluated within the social and legal realities. Now, genomics has power, but when it is introduced into unequal systems, high stigma environments, and weakly regulated legal systems, this power amplifies inequality. Even in high-income countries like the United States, it has enacted protective laws such as the Genetic Information Non-Discrimination Act to prevent the misuse of genetic data. Now, public health goals must not override human dignity. The goal of pre-genetic screening is to detect genetic conditions before marriage. Now, this is a good goal, a laudable goal to achieve. It must not override the dignity of the individuals. Our position is not anti-science, it is pro-ethics, it is pro-protection, and also pro-human dignity. Our first argument is in Nigeria, 20 to 30% of population are sickle cell carriers. So this is talking about the prevalence. Approximately, we have 2 to 3% of people who live with sickle cell disease. Research from African context shows that sickle cell status can influence marriage decision, social perceptions, and psychological well-being. So in a situation where we have 1 in 4 people who are carriers, labeling becomes widespread. Now, this creates marriage market discrimination, social ranking based on genotype, and psychological labeling at a very young age. And if 20 to 30% of population is genetically categorized as undesirable, this is no longer prevention. This becomes stratification. This becomes segmentation of, and it's a stigma. It becomes a stigma in the community. The next argument is that we have lack of specific genetic discrimination protections. Now, unlike countries like the United States, which have explicit genetic protection laws, most African nations do not have this genetic non-discrimination legislation, and they also lack enforcement structure for genetic data misuse. They also do not regulate informal genotype disclosure in religious or cultural institutions. So, like I said before, United States passed the GINA law, which is the Genetic International Non-Discrimination Act, specifically to prevent discrimination in employment and insurance. Now, we are collecting some of the most intimate biological data without a continent-wide enforcement system. This is ethically premature. It is voluntary in theory, but coercive in practice. When the refusal of a pre-genetic screening leads to social rejection, consent is no longer fully autonomous. This means that when people cannot voluntarily say they want to do premarital genetic testing, consent is no longer autonomous. So ethical screening must meet the standard of informed consent, confidentiality, and freedom from coercion. Without these safeguards, harm risks increases. Our next argument is narrowing of research focus leading to screening trap. Now, when a country or a system heavily promotes premarital screening, research funding may shift towards detection, so it's shift toward only screening and routine diagnostic lab, population screening logistic. And instead of investing in the therapy, in gene therapy, CRISPR-based intervention, pharmacogenetics that would actually solve the problem, we are moving towards or shifting towards detection alone. Now, this actually creates a screening heavy system rather than a discovery driven ecosystem. The fourth argument is innovation discouragement through problem-solved illusion. So when policymakers treat premarital genetic testing as problem solved, attention and urgency for advanced treatment, research, and molecular biology innovation can decline. This is also like our last argument. So genetic screening raises privacy, discrimination, and stigma risks, which can discourage individuals from testing and exacerbate social exclusion and reproductive pressure. Here is the rebuttal from the opposition. Premarital genetic testing reduces disease burden and promotes reproductive autonomy. So while disease reduction is important, evidence shows that screening program in high stigma settings may produce unintended psychological, psychosocial harm when legal and counseling systems are inadequate. Reproductive autonomy also requires true voluntariness, confidential decision making, and protection from discrimination. So where these safeguards are weak, autonomy becomes constrained rather than enhanced. Therefore, the ethical solution is not expansion without protection, but sequential implementation after enforceable legal and social safeguards are established. Here is my closing statement. This debate is not about rejecting science. It is about sequencing ethics correctly. In a continent where up to 30% are genetic carriers, legal safeguards are limited, stigma remains strong, women bear disproportionate social consequences. Premarital genetic testing risks amplifying inequality until anti-discrimination laws are explicit, counseling infrastructure is universal, confidentiality enforcement is guaranteed. This policy should be approached with caution and avoided in contexts where harms outweigh the benefits. Genomics must expand justice, not redefine worth. Here are my references. Thank you so much for listening. Any questions?